There was a time when the silver screens of Britain belonged to one woman, Margaret Lockwood. Her beauty wasn't loud. It lingered like smoke, haunting and unforgettable. In an era drowning in war and fear, she became the face people turned to for escape, poised, magnetic, untouchable. And then, she disappeared. No scandal, no farewell, no final bow. One day she was everywhere on posters, in headlines, in dreams, and the next, she was gone. The audience kept waiting for her return. The studios called. The world still needed her. But Margaret Lockwood had already made her choice, a choice to walk away when the applause was loudest. Why would a woman at the height of her fame choose silence over immortality? What secret did she guard so fiercely that she let her own legend fade into the dark? This is not just the story of a star, it's the story of a disappearance written in shadows. Born in the distant heat of Karachi in 1916, Margaret Lockwood arrived in Britain carrying little more than ambition and a gaze that could quiet a room. London in the 1,930 seconds was gray, restless, and hungry for faces that could shimmer against its gloom, and hers did. She studied her craft with precision at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, molding herself not into a dream, but into a presence. Her rise came swiftly when Alfred Hitchcock cast her in the Lady Vanishes, 1938, where she embodied courage, wit, and that impossible blend of innocence and mystery. Audiences fell in love not because she smiled, but because she didn't need to. Through The Man in Grey and The Wicked Lady, Lockwood became Britain's dark enchantress, elegant yet dangerous, adored yet unpredictable. Newspapers crowned her the nation's star. Women wanted to be her, men couldn't forget her. And just as her reflection filled every cinema window, the turning point came. Hollywood extended its glittering hand, but she turned away. The world thought she was unshakable, but even legends have a line they refuse to cross. Behind her graceful silence, the first shadow began to stir. Margaret Mary Lockwood's story began far from fame, a child caught between continents, raised by a mother who dreamed of stability and a father who longed for escape. When their marriage fractured, Margaret found her sanctuary not in home, but in performance. Acting wasn't ambition for her, it was survival, a way to disappear into someone else's truth. At RADA, she was disciplined, reserved, and unassuming. But there was something about her silence that drew attention, a quiet intensity that camera lenses loved. One casting director described her eyes as the kind that never tell you everything. Her first major roles came in modest British productions, yet every scene she touched felt alive. Then, fate and Alfred Hitchcock intervened. In The Lady Vanishes, she didn't just play a heroine, she redefined what one looked like. She was clever, composed, human, a woman of reason in a world unraveling. After that, success consumed her. The Man in Grey, The Wicked Lady roles that celebrated her contradictions, virtue wrapped in sin, warmth encased in restraint. The country couldn't get enough of her, but in photographs from that golden period, you can already sense at a distance behind the glamour, a shadow forming in her smile. Margaret Lockwood was shining, but perhaps she already knew that brilliance never lasts forever. Fame, for Margaret Lockwood, arrived not like sunlight but like fire. It warmed her, dazzled her, and then began to burn. By the mid-1940 seconds, her face was unavoidable, splashed across posters, perfume ads, and front pages. Yet the woman behind that perfect composure was already wrestling with the weight of being everyone's idea of perfection. Studio executives dictated her wardrobe, her words, even her silences. The more she tried to hold on to herself, the more the industry demanded her surrender. Then came the moment that changed everything. She was offered a role that, by all measures, would have catapulted her career, but the script was cheap, the morality hollow. She refused. It was a simple no, but in a business built on obedience, it was her act of rebellion. Overnight, whispers began. She's difficult. She's arrogant. The studios that once adored her grew cold. Projects were canceled. Calls stopped coming. At home, her marriage began to fray under the strain of constant scrutiny. Her refuge became her daughter, Julia, the one place she could still be seen as a person, not a product. The public still adored Margaret Lockwood, but behind the flashbulbs, she stood alone, a woman learning that fame demands not just talent, but submission. And submission was something she would never give. It didn't happen suddenly. There was no grand scandal, no collapse, just a gradual fading, like the end of a film reel running out of light. Margaret Lockwood, once the pulse of British cinema, found herself watching from the sidelines as new faces filled the screens she once ruled. The world had changed. The war was over, and audiences wanted something different, something younger, softer, more American. The woman who had carried British film through its darkest decade was now considered a relic of it. She tried to fight against the silence, performing on stage, appearing in radio plays, even dabbling in television. But the offers were smaller, the scripts weaker, the applause dimmer. Behind her professionalism, there was an unmistakable ache, not for lost fame, but for lost purpose. Friends described her as gracious yet withdrawn. She no longer attended premieres. She stopped granting interviews. The sharp edge that once defined her characters had softened into melancholy. She never begged for work. She never chased relevance. Instead, she allowed herself to be forgotten, a decision that baffled those who once worshipped her. Margaret Lockwood didn't fall from grace. She stepped down quietly, as if she knew the stage no longer deserved her. By the late 1960 seconds, the woman who once embodied the pulse of British cinema had become a quiet ghost of its memory. Margaret Lockwood still acted occasionally, carefully, but fame no longer shaped her days. She lived in a modest home in London, away from the noise of an industry she no longer recognized. When old friends tried to reconnect, she often declined. There were no grudges, only distance, as though the world she once conquered belonged to someone else now. The invitations to retrospectives and reunions kept coming, but she never appeared. She left no explanations, no bitterness, only silence. Those who caught rare glimpses of her in later years said she carried an air of serenity, almost regal detachment. The sparkle that once commanded the screen had turned inward. She read, gardened, and kept to herself. Fame had become a chapter she had already closed. When news of her passing came in 1990, it arrived like a whisper. There were no breaking headlines, no televised tributes. Only quiet admiration and disbelief that someone so visible could slip away so completely. Her final act was one of grace, a retreat so perfect, so controlled, that it felt less like disappearance and more like art. Time has softened her image, but it has never erased it. In the flicker of old film reels, Margaret Lockwood still lives, her gaze sharp, her presence magnetic, her silence louder than applause. The Lady Vanishes continues to be studied for its precision. The Wicked Lady still dazzles with its defiance. To watch her now is to glimpse a kind of artistry that no longer exists, controlled, intelligent, and burning quietly beneath the surface. She never shouted for attention. She simply commanded it. Every gesture, every pause, carried meaning. Even in black and white, she seemed to paint in color. Critics call her the conscience of British cinema, the actress who brought depth to roles written for decoration. But her legacy stretches beyond performance. She became the symbol of artistic integrity, a woman who chose dignity over spectacle, silence over surrender. In an age obsessed with fame's echo, her choice to fade remains her loudest statement. Margaret Lockwood may have walked away, but she never truly left. Because somewhere, in the soft grain of forgotten film, her eyes still find you, and for a moment, she is here again. Fame and disappearance, two extremes that defined Margaret Lockwood. She burned brightly, not for the promise of eternity, but for the purity of her craft. When the applause became too loud, she chose silence. When the world demanded more, she offered nothing. That refusal, that quiet dignity, became the most haunting scene of her career. She didn't fade because she was forgotten, she faded because she wanted to. In a time when every actor fought to remain visible, she proved that vanishing could be the most powerful act of all. Her story isn't a tragedy. It's a kind of victory, the triumph of self-possession in a world that thrives on surrender. Margaret Lockwood left no final speech, no confession, no curtain call. Only the echo of her presence and the knowledge that some stars do not die out. They simply choose where the light ends. What would you have said to Margaret Lockwood if she had stepped back into the light for one last time? Would you ask her why she left, or thank her for showing that silence can be its own kind of strength? Tell us in the comments what you remember most about the Lady Vanishes, the Wicked Lady, or the mystery of her disappearance. If her story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so that her legacy continues to live in the hearts of those who still believe in quiet brilliance. Fame and shadows, every star has its story.